It resides at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, bright white pillars shining under the Washington sky. America's most snapped residence, the globe's most influential spot. Yet the White House standing there now looks little like its original form. The structure got torched down to its base, stripped out to naked frames, reconstructed entirely with iron beams and cement, converted into a stronghold featuring subterranean shelters that go far deeper than folks typically imagine. This narrative explores how a basic Georgian estate evolved into the nerve center for the planet's mightiest country, how forced laborers erected it using their own efforts, how invading British troops attempted to raze it, how it almost crumbled from internal pressures, and how it was covertly reshaped into far more than a mere dwelling. The White House gained its authority not by chance. It rose to prominence via flames, rebuilding, and reinvention, through choices forged in wartime, through mysteries hidden under its foundations. Here's the tale of its evolution. If you enjoyed delving into the concealed past of America's iconic structures, hit subscribe on the channel. We're revealing the narratives tied to the estates that molded a country. We'll kick off at the origins, featuring an Irish designer, a leader who never occupied it, and the toilers whose identities were destined to fade from memory. Chapter 1. Constructing the President's Residence. It was 1792. The United States was just over a decade into existence, and its officials confronted an issue unrelated to overseas threats or partisan conflicts. They required a home for the chief executive, a fixed abode in a fresh capital that still lay on the drawing board. Pierre-Charles L'Enfant had sketched bold blueprints for Washington, wide boulevards fanning out from key hubs, civic edifices placed to evoke wonder. But L'Enfant's arrogance matched his grand ideas, leading to his ouster by early 1792. President George Washington assumed direct oversight of the endeavor. He aimed for this home to be executed properly, an edifice symbolizing the fledgling republic without evoking royalty, refined yet democratic, sturdy yet unostentatious. In March 1792, Washington launched a contest for designs. The award, $500 plus a parcel in the emerging capital. 9 designers entered bids. Many fell flat. Others were downright dismal, yet one instantly grabbed Washington's interest. That entry arrived from James Hoban, an Irish origin builder based in Charleston, South Carolina. Washington had encountered Hoban a year earlier on a trip through the southern regions. The leader had praised a Charleston courthouse crafted by Hoban. The building displayed a refined grasp of Georgian style. Crisp outlines, balanced ratios, precisely aligning with Washington's ideals. Hoban's proposal for the executive's home pulled cues from Leinster House in Dublin, a property he was familiar with from his studies at the Dublin Society of Arts. The frontage included a peaked gable held up by 4 cylindrical pillars, 3 panes below the gable, 4 panes per flank, switching between pointed and arched tops paired smokestacks at either end. Washington called Hoban to Philadelphia in June 1792. The chief executive examined the blueprint firsthand, suggesting alterations. The initial layout proposed 3 levels. Washington pushed for 2. The exterior demanded stone cladding over brick. Such adjustments would speed up the build and cut costs. On July 16, 1792, Washington named Hoban's entry the victor. The choice wrapped up in under 60 minutes, but triumphing in the contest was straightforward compared to the real challenge ahead. Erecting the estate would demand far greater effort. The plot rested in a thinly settled area straddling Maryland and Virginia, territories rooted in slavery. This positioning would carry heavier weight than anyone foresaw at first. Hoban drafted blueprints right away. He projected an 8-year timeline. He required expert woodworkers, rock cutters, masons, finishers. He sought everyday hands to prepare the ground, excavate bases, transport supplies. The board managing the capital's development sought hires from across the Atlantic. They placed ads in periodicals. They promised solid pay. The turnout was poor. Overseas tradesmen saw no appeal in journeying to a marshy backwater to raise a metropolis that lingered only in sketches. Thus, the board shifted to a nearby workforce pool. Enslaved African Americans. The foundation stone went in on October 13, 1792. Labor commenced at once, and right from the outset, Bound individuals provided the core muscle. Owners in Maryland and Virginia rented out their chattel to the national overseers. The setup was straightforward yet harsh. The authorities compensated the owner $5 to $8 monthly per hand. The bound worker got zilch. All funds flowed to the proprietor. Their identities show up in wage ledgers at the National Archives: Ben, Peter, Harry, Daniel. These workers were recorded as belonging to James Hoban directly. The very architect responsible for planning the executive residence also held in bondage the laborers who raised its structure. Additional names appear in the records: Jacob, owned by George Fenwick; Gerald, Tony, and Jack, rented out by Edmund Plowden; Charles, Davy, Gabriel, Henry, and Nance, supplied by the Brent sisters from Maryland. Far beyond basic physical toil, these forced workers engaged in demanding tasks. Enslaved individuals extracted sandstone from Aquia Creek in Virginia. They shaped the raw blocks that Scottish stonemasons would later refine and set into the building's walls. Serving as carpenters, sawyers, and brick producers, they transported supplies over vast, rugged distances via wagons in their own physical strength. Officials built modest wooden shelters on the site to accommodate the crew. These plain, uncoated buildings stood spaced 20 feet apart. Every enslaved worker got 2 daily rations of cornmeal paired with either pork or beef. Their owners had to supply garments in a single blanket. The oversight board handled essential health care. The labor proved grueling. From sunrise to sunset, 6 days weekly, they hewed rock amid summer swelter, blended cement in winter chill, carried beams, set bricks, and forged the home that would embody U.S. democratic ideals. Not everyone overlooked the paradox. Certain witnesses highlighted the stark inconsistency at the time. A grand estate honoring freedom erected by those utterly denied it. Yet the effort pressed on. The barriers ascended gradually. The ground level finished by 1795. The upper story forming by 1796. The covering installed by 1797. Scottish masons sculpted ornate features, the prominent relief lines and festoon over the northern doorway, the imbricated design below the window lintels. Skilled artisans from Europe tackled the finest details. Still, the bonded workers formed the bedrock for it all. Quite literally. Over 200 recorded enslaved men contributed to the executive residence. The true count probably exceeded that. Numerous others escaped documentation, their efforts deemed ordinary, their identities deemed irrelevant. George Washington inspected the location often. He scrutinized the masonry. He assessed the advancement. He conferred specifics with Hoban. Yet Washington never resided in the dwelling he aided in developing. His term concluded in March 1799, while building remained unfinished. John Adams served as the initial chief executive to inhabit the estate. He settled in during November 1800's early days. The space was scarcely livable, with fresh plaster on numerous surfaces, just 6 chambers properly equipped, the main stairway incomplete, yet sufficiently prepared. Abigail Adams dried clothes in the bare east chamber. She griped about the chill, the moisture, the remoteness. The edifice loomed in an isolated spot, encircled by building waste and mire. Nevertheless, the executive residence endured. Walls of Aquia Creek sandstone, slate covering, graceful dimensions, precisely as Hoban envisioned. The estate demanded 8 years to finish. It exceeded $200,000 in expense, and it arose chiefly through the efforts of those destined never to gain liberty, never to receive wages, never to earn recognition. Their palms molded each block, their exertion lifted every barrier, their perspiration blended into the cement. Yet for the subsequent 2 centuries, history overlooked them. The dwelling stood finished, already reshaping the essence of presidential life, already evolving beyond mere lodging. It was transforming into an emblem, a declaration, the dawn of an expansion far surpassing the visions of 1800 inhabitants. Chapter 2. The British torch it. For 14 years, the executive residence remained unscathed. Then, on a sweltering August night in 1814, invading troops ignited it and observed the flames. The War of 1812 had dragged on for 2 years. U.S. citizens dubbed it the Second War for Independence. The foes viewed it as a sideshow to their grander struggle against Napoleon. Regardless, come summer 1814, troops from overseas resolved to deliver a memorable rebuke to the presumptuous Americans. Vice Admiral George Cockburn and Major General Robert Ross led 4,500 seasoned combatants. No amateur local forces here. These were battle-tested fighters from the Peninsular War, elite troops who had clashed with the French through Spain and Portugal. Their objective? Washington, the U.S. seat of power. The tactical reasoning was straightforward: seize the hub, shame the regime, extract a beneficial truce. Vengeance played a role, too. In April 1813, American troops had torched York, Upper Canada's capital. King George's army harbored that grudge. On August 24, 1814, the assault force clashed with U.S. Guards at Bladensburg, Maryland, near the capital. The skirmish endured scarcely 2 hours. Local defenders scattered in retreat. The path to the heart of government stood exposed. President James Madison had ventured forth to witness the fight. Spotting his troops disintegrating, he wheeled his mount and galloped toward Washington, outpacing the oncoming adversaries. The leader of the United States was evacuating his own stronghold. At the President, as the British troops advanced toward the President's residence, First Lady Dolly Madison confronted a tough call. Her spouse had departed, leaving her orders to protect vital government documents. Yet the invaders were drawing near. She might have just 60 minutes, or even fewer. Dolly Madison decided her path. She aimed to rescue as much as possible. The official papers came priority: cabinet files, key correspondence, any movable items. Next, she headed to the dining area. A feast waited on the table, set for the President's anticipated return. But in the end, London's officers would partake instead. One final piece caught her eye: the life-sized painting of George Washington, crafted by Gilbert Stuart. It adorned the state dining room, measuring 7 feet in height. The depiction of the inaugural president who had directed the building of this exact home. The artwork was fastened firmly to the wall. Madison's staff struggled to detach it swiftly, so they shattered the frame. They sliced the canvas free from its supports. They bundled it up securely and whisked it off. Dolly Madison escaped the president's home at 3:00 p.m. She traversed the Potomac into Virginia. In her wake, the city cleared out. Locals seized whatever they could transport and bolted. The foes arrived in Washington at 8:00 p.m. Ross and Cockburn led the procession on horseback. They faced zero opposition. The place lay deserted. The leaders proceeded to the president's dwelling. The entrance yawned wide. Within, the supper table remained arranged, the food still steamy. Glasses filled with wine. Accounts suggest the officers paused to take seats and consume the spread. They sipped the drinks. They raised toasts to King George. They quipped about President Madison's rushed exit. Afterward, they turned to their duties. Cockburn pushed to incinerate the whole town, every edifice, every fixture. A statement etched in soot and wreckage. But Ross vetoed the idea. They targeted solely official edifices, civic installations, spared personal holdings. The president's house topped their agenda. Troops stacked furnishings amid each chamber: seats, surfaces, workstations, burnable goods. They smashed panes to foster airflow. They doused accelerants via gunpowder. Then they sparked the fires. The blaze raced through, drapes blazed up, wall coverings ignited, timber flooring smoldered. The core of the president's house turned into a raging furnace. From afar, those who lingered observed the glow illuminating the darkness. The emblem of their nascent country was ablaze. The adversaries dismantled it deliberately, section by section, yet the outer barriers endured. Hoban sandstone from Aquia Creek resisted the heat. The rock darkened, the joints fractured, but the barriers persisted. By the stroke of midnight, the insides lay utterly ravaged. Levels tumbled to the cellar. The ceiling buckled. Just the stony framework lingered, scorched and vacant. Ross's troops pressed forward. The Capitol followed, then the Treasury facility, then the Navy Yard. Come morning, the national hub smoldered in devastation. Yet the aggressors lingered briefly. Ross recognized the folly of holding a belligerent urban center with scant forces. His goal was ruin, not seizure. On August 25th, under a full day since their arrival in Washington, the troops pulled back. They abandoned a ravaged seat of power, the president's house reduced to a gutted husk, the Capitol in rubble, the administration in flight, the disgrace absolute. James Madison re-entered Washington on August 27th. He inspected the wreckage. The abode he'd occupied for 3 years had vanished. All contents obliterated. Solely the soot-streaked barriers remained upright. The dilemma boiled down to basics: restore or forsake. Certain congressional voices advocated relocating the hub, possibly to Philadelphia anew, or some fortified spot. The scorched sites shamed the nation. Why not launch anew elsewhere? Yet counterparts demanded Washington stay the core. Deserting it would grant the foes an enduring triumph. It would confirm the Americans' inability to safeguard their governance center. Madison aligned with the retention advocates. The hub would endure in Washington, and the president's house would rise anew. The figure summoned for the task was the original architect. James Hoban came back to the debris of his handiwork. At 56, the estate bore his blueprint, his labor. If anybody could revive it from the embers, Hoban could. In October 1814, merely 2 months post-invasion, lawmakers allocated reconstruction money. Insufficient in the long run, but adequate to start. Hoban examined the harm meticulously. The outer barriers had withstood, tainted and fissured, yet stable. A lucky break. Erecting fresh ones would demand ages. Rather, he built upon the survivors. The plan solidified. Retain the outer barriers, scour them, mend them, coat them white to mask the scars, and reconstruct the interiors entirely. The president's house had outlasted its initial demise. Now it would emerge once more, block upon block, barrier upon barrier. But it would require 3 additional years. Before any president could reside there once more, the site endured 3 years of rebuilding efforts, 3 years of anticipation to demonstrate that the invaders had failed to shatter their resolve. The fire was extinguished, yet the metamorphosis was only getting underway. Chapter 3. Emerging from the ruins. James Hoban gazed at the devastation and evaluated what might be preserved. The outer walls bore scorch marks. The mortar had fractured under the extreme temperatures. Window casings had vanished. The roof had caved in entirely. However, the Aqua Creek sandstone had fulfilled its purpose. The walls remained upright. This carried significance. It signified that restoration could proceed without clearing the land from scratch. It indicated the executive residence could be resurrected in a few years rather than decades. Yet, initially, they needed to clear the debris. In October 1814, Congress allocated funding merely 2 months following the arson. The sum fell short, as all recognized, but it sufficed to commence operations. It sufficed to illustrate that the nation would not forsake its seat of power. Hoban gathered his team in early 1815. Among them were veterans from the initial build, masons familiar with each barrier, woodworkers who had erected the ground levels. They came back to complete the task the foes had sought to obliterate. Efforts kicked off with demolition. Rubble cluttered every chamber, scorched beams, tumbled ceilings, incinerated furnishings, shattered panes. All required removal prior to any rebuilding phase. Laborers spent months purging the insides. They transported charred fragments via the vacant openings. They scooped up soot. They rescued scant items fit for reuse. Primarily, they prepared the area for future phases. Benjamin Henry Latrobe came aboard as advisory designer. Latrobe had contributed to the city's development prior to the conflict. He offered refined insight into neoclassical aesthetics. Hoban valued the support while retaining oversight of the entire endeavor. The duo of designers inspected the harm jointly. They concurred on the strategy: retain the outer walls, mend and reinforce them, coat them white to mask the scorch scars, and then overhaul the interiors from the ground up. That coating choice birthed the enduring moniker. Prior to 1814, folks referred to it merely as the president's home or the executive residence. Post-restoration, once the crew applied gleaming white paint to the sandstone surfaces to conceal the blaze traces, it earned the title of the White House. The term started informally but gained traction swiftly. By 1820, nearly all used White House for it. The revival progressed more rapidly than the first erection. The base was already in place. The barriers endured. The core framework persisted. Artisans concentrated on internal woodwork, wall coating, and detailing. Fresh beam supports for floors were installed initially, sturdier than before. Hoban had gained wisdom from the inferno. Should it recur, he aimed for levels that wouldn't tumble so readily into the lower areas. The covering followed, featuring new slate tiles with solid backing. Crews fitted it meticulously across 1815 and extending into 1816. Securing the covering proved essential. It shielded the contents from elemental harm. Once the structure was sealed against the elements, internal tasks gained momentum. Wall finishers progressed chamber by chamber. Woodworkers added borders and ornaments. Coders trailed in their wake. The official areas on the lower level got first attention. The chief executive required venues for ceremonial events. The eastern chamber was reconstructed broader than previously. Hoban extended it modestly, capitalizing on the overhaul to refine the arrangement. This space would accommodate gatherings for scores of attendees. It demanded the extra room. The rounded chamber on the southern flank evolved into the Blue Room. Latrobe proposed the oval form for this reception area. The arc fashioned a graceful setting for receiving envoys. It would evolve into one of the mansion's most captured spaces in images. The formal eating area found its place in the northwest sector. Spacious for state banquets, yet not extravagantly vast, the ethos of modest republicanism lingered, even in the wake of 1814's disgrace. On the upper level, the family zones materialized: sleeping quarters for the presidential household, visitor accommodations, utility areas, all essentials for routine presidential existence. The labor persisted through 1816 and into 1817. Hoban drove the team forward. President Madison desired the dwelling prepared. The administration required its emblem revived. By the summer of 1817, sufficient chambers were done to allow inhabitation. Not yet luxurious, not fully realized, but livable. President Madison opted against reclaiming it in his last days. He could have returned during his term's close. Rather, he bestowed the privilege on James Monroe, set to assume the role in March 1817. Monroe entered the midway rebuilt White House in October 1817. 3 years and 2 months post the blaze. The pace was extraordinary. Hoban and his squad had achieved in 3 years what had demanded 8 at the outset. Yet completion eluded them. Monroe dwelled amidst active building. Wall finishers toiled in incomplete sections. Coders scaled frameworks. Woodworkers fitted details. The PR. While the president carried on with official duties amid the ongoing repairs by laborers, the restoration efforts persisted for yet another year. Finishing touches, ornamental features, interior decor, all the elements that elevated a structure into a fitting home for the chief executive. In 1824, Hoban introduced yet another key alteration: the south portico, featuring a semicircular veranda with sweeping staircases ascending to the southern doorway. Hoban had suggested such porticos prior to the blaze. At last, under the Monroe presidency, he secured permission to construct the southern version. This south portico altered the mansion's facade profoundly. It provided a majestic approach from the garden front. The graceful steps and pillared veranda formed the legendary silhouette seen in innumerable images. 5 years afterward, in 1829, Hoban installed the north portico. President Andrew Jackson endorsed this enhancement. The north entrance now rivaled the south in splendor. Pillars upheld a triangular pediment. The doorway conveyed authority and lasting stability. These porticos realized Hoban's long-held design. He had envisioned them before 1814, yet circumstances had prevented their execution. Paradoxically, the British invasion opened the door. The rebuilding phase enabled upgrades that might otherwise have remained unrealized. By 1830, the executive residence emerged fully revived and improved, more robust than its predecessor, more polished. The wounds from 1814 vanished entirely under layers of whitewash and graceful extensions. Hoban was then 70 years of age. He had erected this edifice on 2 occasions, first from empty earth, then from charred remnants. Each effort produced a legacy of endurance. He survived just 1 additional year. James Hoban passed away in December 1831. His remains found rest in Washington, the city he had aided in shaping. The residence served as his enduring tribute. The overhaul had demanded roughly $500,000, exceeding the initial build by a wide margin. Yet the country deemed the expenditure worthwhile. Forsaking the capital post-incineration would signal capitulation. Reviving it signaled resolve. The president's dwelling had withstood flames and conflict. It had been resurrected more solidly than ever, and it was starting to gather the influence that would one day render it the globe's premier address. Even Hoban could scarcely have foreseen the future twists. He couldn't have anticipated that within little more than a century, his creation would face evisceration anew. This time, not from hostile troops but from the U.S. government, the edifice that ascended from enemy infernos would eventually be hollowed to its core and reconstructed internally, evolving into an entity beyond Hoban's blueprint, far surpassing a mere Georgian residence. That evolution loomed on the horizon. But initially, the president's home remained as Hoban had shaped it for over a century, its pale exterior shining, its verandas declaring fortitude, an emblem of tenacity. It had emerged from cinders once before. Ere long, it would undergo renewal yet again. Chapter 4. The total evisceration. Truman's overhaul commences. Margaret Truman was at the piano when one leg pierced the flooring. February 1948. The chief executive's daughter was rehearsing in her upstairs lounge. The Steinway Concert Grand represented a cherished heirloom. Margaret performed frequently. Suddenly, the surface yielded, not entirely. The instrument didn't plummet into the space beneath, but its leg breached the planks. Timber cracked. The piano tilted abruptly. Margaret halted her music at once. Inspectors arrived for evaluation. Their discoveries exceeded the worst fears. The White House was disintegrating, not due to assault this time, nor blaze or battle. The structure was crumbling from years of wear, oversight, and the basic truth that it lacked sound foundational design from the outset. The framework dated back 148 years. It had gone up hastily in the 1790s using 18th century methods, timbers bracing masonry exteriors. Absent were iron girders, contemporary stress analyses, just lumber, stonework, and faith in its durability. That faith had faltered. Experts uncovered fissures across the edifice. Primary support joists had decayed. Others drooped perilously. The whole flooring arrangement teetered. Facades detached from their anchors. The residence was, in essence, unraveling. President Harry Truman got the report in March 1948. The verdict left no doubt. The White House posed structural hazards, unsafe for habitation. Collapse loomed unpredictably. Truman faced three paths: demolish and erect afresh, vacate and relocate the administration, or hollow it out entirely and reconstruct internally. The initial choice was infeasible on political grounds. Raise the White House, icon of U.S. liberty, the survivor of British arson. Inconceivable. The alternate was just as untenable. Relocate the president elsewhere, forsake 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. That equated to yielding to decay. Thus, the remaining choice prevailed: pare the building to its outer shell, clear out all interiors, reconstruct employing current standards, transform Hoban's G. The White House, originally a Georgian mansion, underwent a radical overhaul, turning it into a 20th century edifice, masked as its 18th century self. Truman reached the verdict swiftly. The plan involved stripping the interior bare, digging under the structure, erecting a robust steel skeleton, and fortifying it to endure another 2 centuries. The endeavor would span several years, rack up millions in expenses, and necessitate relocating the president and his household completely from the premises. Come December 1948, the Trumans gathered their possessions and shifted across the road to Blair House, a more modest estate that would act as the interim presidential home. They anticipated a 2-year stint there. Instead, it stretched to 3. Demolition kicked off in December 1948. The laborers proceeded with precision. This wasn't mere destruction. It resembled a delicate operation. The aim was to preserve the outer walls while stripping away all contents within. Teams captured images of every chamber, recorded each design feature, and labeled every bit of trim. The objective: reconstruct the insides to mirror the prior layout, at least superficially. Then, the dismantling commenced. The grand reception areas came first. Artisans dismantled the ornate plastering in the East Room. They lowered the sparkling chandeliers. They lifted the flooring. All movable items got inventoried and warehoused by chamber and level. They reduced the White House to its core framework. By the spring of 1949, the inside stood utterly vacant. Laborers gazed into a cavernous stone enclosure, visibility stretched from the sublevel to the heavens. The rooftop had vanished, the levels had disappeared, solely the outer barriers endured. Images from that era shock the viewer. The White House appears ravaged, eviscerated, lifeless, merely barriers encircling void. Next, specialists inspected the base, their discoveries alarmed. The initial footing sat too shallow, unfit for the burden above. Since reconstruction was imminent, deeper excavation made sense, so they proceeded. Digging started under the White House that summer of 1949. Teams extracted soil from below the current base. They burrowed further, carving out room for extra subterranean tiers. That's when they expanded the shelter network. The prior emergency command post for the president, predating 1949, had been confined and rudimentary, thrown together amid World War II as a stopgap. Now, with the structure hollowed out and digging in progress, the chance arose to forge something enduring, something solid, a buried hub capable of operating amid atomic conflict. The digging plunged profoundly. The precise depth stays under wraps. Yet the shelter array constructed in this revamp dwarfed prior versions. Reinforced metal portals were fitted, along with signaling gear and air circulation setups geared to scrub out nuclear debris. The Cold War era had dawned. Atomic arms were reality. The leader required a sanctuary to endure and direct if catastrophe struck. As teams tunneled below the White House, parallel squads readied the metal armature to supplant the outdated timber frame. Designers crafted an iron lattice to nestle within the masonry barriers. This armature would bear the load. The outer barriers would linger for aesthetics alone, no longer structural. The iron would shoulder the burden. It marked a breakthrough, adapting a Georgian residence with cutting-edge building science, safeguarding the facade while revolutionizing its stability. The metal shipments arrived toward the close of 1949. Enormous girders, I-beams, pillars, and diagonal supports, sufficient for a high-rise yet tailored to the White House's outline. Assembly started in January 1950. Crews raised the iron lattice level by level. The armature ascended amid the empty masonry husk. Contemporary mechanics concealed by heritage stonework. The disparity was pronounced. 18th century sandstone without, 20th century iron within. The White House evolved into a fused relic, classic exterior, innovative core. By midsummer 1950, the iron armature stood finished. The edifice boasted a fresh backbone, tougher than Hoban could have envisioned, capable of bearing expansions, poised to persist for ages. Now followed the task of restoring what had been excised. But this round would differ. They would construct for an atomic epoch, for an era where the president might hunker in the depths for days, against perils Hoban never fathomed. The White House that Truman's family would reclaim appeared unchanged above ground. The spaces would be replicated, the trimwork revived, the chandeliers repositioned. Yet under that recognizable veneer, all had shifted. Iron over timber, cement over planks, shelters over cellars. The overhaul transcended mere refurbishment, it was rebirth. The chief's dwelling had perished. From this ravaged husk would arise a novel entity, mightier than a mere residence, engineered to weather apocalypse. Chapter 5. Reconstructing for the era of atomic threats, iron frameworks, cement fortifications, and underground shelters. The metal framework was fully assembled by the summer of 1950. The next phase involved camouflaging the updates to seem unchanged. This rebuild embodied a key contradiction: overhaul the entire structure while retaining every outward appearance. Erect a contemporary stronghold masked as a classic Georgian estate. Ensure it seemed as if no drastic alterations had occurred. The effort demanded precise fidelity to historical elements alongside state-of-the-art technology. Laborers fitted in cooling units absent from Hoban's era, wiring for electricity everywhere, up-to-date pipes, telecom gear, all concealed within partitions mimicking the old ones precisely. Then followed the cement pouring, massive quantities. Teams cast cement layers over the iron base. Unlike the decayed timber surfaces of before, these formed sturdy, fortified platforms built to support loads far beyond Hoban's expectations. Installation proceeded floor by floor: basement, main level, official areas, upper living quarters, top story. Every layer got cast, fortified, and polished to strict standards. As surface cement operations advanced overhead, subterranean efforts advanced underneath. The President's Crisis Command Hub emerged far under the eastern section. The prior setup from World War II had been tight, rushed, scarcely sufficient for Roosevelt's conflict demands. This upgraded version stood apart, enduring, robust, crafted to serve as a headquarters amid atomic conflict. Details stay secret, yet the area featured a meeting space equipped with telecom tools, protected phone connections, broadcast setups, later display monitors for global oversight, plus purification units to filter out nuclear fallout. Entry involved complex mechanisms: several heavy vault doors with bio-identification seals, hidden lifts, pathways tucked into unassuming chambers leading below, layered protections everywhere. The refuge aimed to endure a straight atomic hit, or so the intent went. Barriers consisted of dense cement, strongly buttressed. The setup detached from the overhead building to avoid rubble spread. Airflow presented a unique hurdle. The site required clean circulation, yet vents risked importing irradiated elements. Designers created multi-layer purifiers, absorbers for chemicals, high-efficiency barriers, pressure-sensitive gates that shut on detecting blast surges from explosions. Electricity setups included backups. The buried network featured its generators, fuel reserves, power cells. Signal routes passed through diverse channels, ensuring a single breach wouldn't isolate it from the surface. The PEOC operated non-stop. Troops from the executive branch's defense unit rotated in 12-hour cycles, day in and day out indefinitely, guaranteeing a presidential arrival in turmoil would find personnel ready. Entry demanded top-tier clearances. Few in the White House staff grasped the underground scope. Functions stayed under wraps. Even confirming its presence remained off-limits for years. Meanwhile, surface refurbishments moved forward. Plaster experts restored the ornate moldings and overhead emblems taken down earlier. They drew from images and labeled salvaged fragments. All decorative aspects got duplicated faithfully. Woodworkers reassembled the sidewall linings, sculpted fireplaces, detailed borders. Certain salvaged items returned to use. The rest got replicated by artisans who examined prototypes and copied them spot on. The Blue Room got special focus. Its oval form rendered it uniquely striking. Teams reformed the arched sides, the refined dimensions. This venue for endless state gatherings had to shine flawlessly. The East Room regained its majestic scale, the Executive Mansion's biggest chamber, site of media briefings and gala events by leaders. Glass Diaodong swung back into place. The patterned wood flooring got reset, pale and gilded decor positioned just as formerly. The formal dining area accommodated more than 100 at banquets. It got revived with timber coverings and lavish ceiling designs. All evoked Georgian charm, all suggested timeless legacy. Yet concealed within were current power grids, temperature regulation, and data links. On the upper levels, the family quarters formed, sleeping areas for the chief executive's household, visitor suites, the leader's office. Less ceremonial than the public zones below, yet demanding scrupulous era-specific touches. The cooking space got fully updated with polished metal surfaces and industrial-grade fixtures. Modern conveniences, far removed from anything available during Hoban's era, were tucked away in hidden spots to avoid detection by guests, preventing any jarring historical mismatches. Across the entire estate, contemporary infrastructure remained out of sight. Ventilation passages for cooling snaked through concealed partitions. Power distribution boxes lurked inside storage areas. The aim was total concealment, erasing signs of the 20th century under an 18th century veneer. The project dragged on well beyond initial projections, as such restorations invariably do. A timeline planned for 2 years ballooned to 3, edging toward 4. Expenses soared. In the end, the endeavor swallowed up $5.7 million. An enormous figure back in 1950. Lawmakers approved extra funding with hesitation, yet nobody wished to bear the blame if the White House crumbled, so the appropriations continued. From Blair House, President Truman observed the progress, making frequent trips to the site, strolling amid the hollowed-out framework as metal beams were installed, scrutinizing the poured foundations, and reviewing the refurbished chambers as they approached readiness. He grasped the deeper meaning. This went beyond mere upkeep. It represented a profound overhaul. The White House was emerging anew for a different age, one marked by atomic arsenals, worldwide dominance, and perils demanding subterranean refugees and purified atmospheres. By the start of 1952, completion loomed close. The outer shell appeared unchanged. Pale stone facades, columned entrances, and window placements mirrored the past. Hoban could have spotted it immediately from afar. Internally, however, a complete shift had occurred. Metal frameworks bolstered the building. Cement slabs created the levels. Up-to-date utilities permeated every corner, and far underneath, the PEOC lay in wait for an emergency all hoped would stay hypothetical. In March 1952, the Truman family returned after an absence of 3 years and 3 months. They entered spaces that seemed recognizable, yet were utterly renewed at their core. The furnishings stayed identical. The paintings remained unchanged. Ornamental features were faithfully replicated. Yet the house itself had undergone a resurrection. It stood more resilient than before. It came fitted to counter present-day dangers. It evolved from a mere home into a strategic hub. What started as a repair, triggered by a piano crashing through a floorboard, concluded with an extraordinary innovation. A landmark edifice that doubled as a contemporary bastion, an emblem that also served as a protective enclave. The White House retained its appearance, but it had morphed into something beyond Hoban's vision, something vastly more formidable than a leader's dwelling. It had ascended to the nerve center of the Democratic Alliance, constructed to withstand, to persist, to assert authority from within its refined Georgian exterior. The metamorphosis finished, leaving the public oblivious to the depth of the alterations. The metallic core would linger unseen amid stucco and coatings. The subsurface network would remain secret for generations. Visitors would behold a venerable home, thoughtfully safeguarded and upkept. They would remain unaware that under the well-known surface rose something revolutionary, tailored for an atomic epoch, engineered to outlast the gravest calamities. The White House had been revitalized, primed for any future challenge. Chapter 6. The President's Bunker. For years, the installation lay dormant, such is the odd truth about the Presidential Emergency Operations Center. Erected at vast cost, manned around the clock, prepared for catastrophe, yet scarcely ever activated. Leaders acknowledged its presence. They got updates on its functions. They realized that in the event of atomic conflict, they would hurry below via hidden routes and secure themselves within armored portals. But descending there in practice occurred only amid true emergencies. And true emergencies, fortunately, proved infrequent. Its debut practical deployment predated the full Truman overhaul. During World War II, Franklin Roosevelt had directed the building of the initial refuge, a provisional setup under the East Wing. Sturdy concrete barriers, rudimentary radio gear, nothing elaborate, just a spot to endure should Nazi aircraft improbably strike the capital. That never transpired. Roosevelt toured it shortly after it opened. He avoided it thereafter. The area gathered dust for the war's duration. Following the Truman expansion into the enlarged PEOC, it stayed largely conceptual. Commanders handled affairs from the Oval Office. They convened in the cabinet quarters. They resided above in the private apartments. The buried control post served as a safeguard, an extreme contingency. The Cold War lent the rationale for such outlays. Russian atomic capabilities surfaced by 1949. Long-range rockets arrived subsequently. The peril felt tangible, though alert periods might span mere minutes or perhaps hours, sufficient to retreat below ground. The site underwent frequent evaluations. Signal devices received upgrades, exercises took place, troops detailed to the White House military office practiced protocols for swiftly relocating the top official. It was built with the intention of offering protection in dire situations, yet it rarely saw practical deployment. That all shifted on September 11, 2001. At that time, Vice President Dick Cheney found himself in the West Wing as American Airlines Flight 11 slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center at 8:46 a.m. Early accounts were muddled, perhaps a mishap, maybe a light aircraft involved. Moments later, at 9:03, United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower, erasing any doubt. This was a deliberate assault on the United States. By 9:37, American Airlines Flight 77 struck the Pentagon, setting the country's defense hub ablaze, with alerts of yet another stolen plane approaching Washington. Secret Service personnel acted swiftly, without awaiting directives. They seized Cheney and rushed him bodily to the PEOC. His shoes hardly grazed the floor during the dash. First Lady Laura Bush, too, was whisked away to this fortified bunker. In her later memoir, she recounted the ordeal. Agents propelled her down unfamiliar passages, past massive steel portals that sealed with a resounding whoosh, creating an impenetrable barrier. She traversed aged flooring with exposed pipes overhead and humming machinery in plain sight, raw, incomplete tunnels buried deep under the White House, leading to the briefing area. That day, the hub sprang into action. Personnel flooded the space. Links to the Pentagon, NORAD, and fighter squadrons mobilizing nationwide came online. Monitors displayed live footage of the unfolding horror. Encrypted lines linked to leaders nationwide. Cheney assumed control. President Bush, meanwhile, was soaring above the American South on Air Force One. The succession line held firm. Operations continued unabated, and this nerve center pulsed from the shadows beneath the executive mansion. The PEOC transformed into the hub for managing the crisis. Key calls there included halting all flights over U.S. skies, deploying interceptors, and ensuring governmental endurance. Declassified images from the National Archives, shared much later, captured Cheney and colleagues around the elongated table. Wall-mounted TVs, the emblem of the presidency, arrays of phones and gear, stark concrete in the backdrop. The space appeared basic, practical rather than plush, built for short-term crisis handling, a mere refuge to endure and direct amid chaos. For hours, Cheney stayed below ground, orchestrating countermeasures, absorbing briefings, issuing orders as Bush circled high for protection. The setup delivered precisely as intended, a shielded spot to uphold leadership continuity, safeguarding vital figures while enabling their duties. It succeeded. Still, Cheney voiced frustrations over the tech, antiquated setups, spotty links. Officials took note and sketched modernization efforts. Such improvements, however, got deferred until the enigmatic renovation from 2010 to 2012, a tale for another time. The events of 9/11 underscored the bunker's vital role: genuine peril, acute emergency, urgent demand for a hidden command post under the nation's prime symbol of power. From then on, commanders-in-chief viewed the PEOC with greater gravity. It gained focus, enhancements, boosted budgets. No longer just a concept on paper. The facility saw reuse even on 9/11. As Bush arrived back in Washington that night, he convened his security advisors in the depths, reviewing strategies and outlining next steps. In subsequent years, it handled sporadic activations for alerts and exercises. During warnings of strikes on the Capitol, top aides occasionally operated from there. Amid storms endangering the city, response units directed efforts from the buried facility. It evolved from hypothetical to hands-on. Then arrived May 29, 2020. Unrest had spread nationwide after George Floyd's killing in Minneapolis. By late that month, crowds amassed near the White House, many calm, others unruly. Blazes raged in adjacent structures. Law enforcement scuffled with the throng. On the evening of May 29th, agents relocated Donald Trump to the PEOC. They called the shots amid worsening conditions. The grounds felt vulnerable. The subterranean site offered better odds. Reports suggest Trump lingered there briefly, under 60 minutes by certain accounts. No outright breach against the White House ever occurred. Guards held the line. Tensions eased, though details of his relocation surfaced fast. Outlets covered how Trump had descended during the unrest. He was said to be enraged by the disclosure, pushing probes into the source of the media tip. The episode highlighted the growing political weight of such relocations. Roosevelt had toured his bunker without fuss. Cheney's stint on 9/11 drew no ire. Yet Trump's descent underground sparked the backdrop of civil unrest at home, altered the public perception. What had started as an essential wartime asset evolved into a tool for handling emergencies and eventually a political risk, all within a single term. Nevertheless, it persisted, operating non-stop with full staffing, ongoing upkeep and enhancements, poised for any impending emergency. The PEOC embodied a core aspect of contemporary leadership. The role carried such weight that no chances could be taken. The nation's top official had to be shielded from death or impairment amid turmoil. Ensuring governmental continuity required safeguards. Thus, the control hub lingered under the East Wing, ever vigilant, perpetually on standby, ideally unused but prepared nonetheless. In the event of catastrophe, it stood equipped to secure its entrances, purify its atmosphere, and sustain executive operations even as chaos engulfed the surface world. Such was its role. This justified the vast investments in reinforced materials, metal frameworks, and air circulation setups, guaranteeing the U.S. administration's persistence, operation, and resilience regardless of circumstances. The setup served as a safeguard against doomsday. And akin to any policy of assurance, it proved most effective when left untouched, yet it endured, invariably present. Underneath the pristine pillars and graceful verandas, below the azure chamber and formal banquet hall, beneath the emblem of U.S. governance, concealed, restricted, alert, a testament that the executive residence had transcended its origins as a mere residence. It now functioned as a bastion, a nerve center, a refuge for endurance. The overhaul initiated under Truman's rebuild had forged an unparalleled entity, a landmark edifice doubling as a defense outpost, a residence integrated with a hub for urgent response. And far below the recognizable exterior, the PEOC bided its time, steadfast, enduring, primed for the ordeal all wished to avert. Chapter 7. The enigmatic 2010 build-out, erecting the contemporary stronghold. During spring 2010, sturdy timber barriers encircled the west wing of the White House. There was no press release, no rationale offered, just enclosures shielding onlookers from activities in the obscured area. Soon, vehicles began rolling in, bulky machinery, cement trucks, metal transport rigs. A major build was in progress, yet officials stayed silent. The stated explanation was straightforward: system improvements for infrastructure, outdated utilities requiring swaps, plumbing for water, drainage lines, power wiring, standard care for a structure over half a century past its prior extensive overhaul. However, the project's magnitude suggested otherwise. This went beyond everyday fixes. The digging was extensive, profoundly so. Laborers burrowed well underground, hauling away massive volumes of soil, dumping concrete in bulk, erecting girders robust enough for a high-rise. The General Services Administration oversaw operations. They maintained it, involved merely essential utility overhauls. The executive complex required modernized setups, nothing further. Skepticism abounded. The initiative carried a $376 million price tag. Such funds aren't allocated to pipe replacements. The schedule spanned 4 years. Finish was anticipated in 2012 or later, and the veil of secrecy was intense. The GSA employed extreme measures to conceal activities. Beyond erecting barriers around the dig, they directed secondary contractors to remain mum. Incoming haulers at the gates were told to cover corporate markings on their cabs. Employees executed confidentiality pacts. Guards were stringent. Inquiries yielded evasive replies on systems and services. The effort unfolded under the Obama era. Barack Obama assumed the presidency in January 2009. By 2010, efforts were advancing on what seemed like a substantial growth of subsurface installations below the West Wing. The juncture mattered. The 9/11 attacks lay 9 years in the past. The PEOC had demonstrated utility then. But Vice President Cheney's gripes over obsolete tech links had registered. Upgrades were essential. Beyond that, dangers had shifted. Terror acts no longer dominated worries alone. Digital assaults, EMP strikes, atomic extremism. The spectrum of perils to the executive had broadened immensely since Truman's upgrades. The White House required functions absent in 1950. It demanded a hub resilient to prolonged disruptions, impervious to current armaments, capable of upholding operations should the overlying urban area fall. Hence, they excavated. The groundwork plunged deep under the north grounds. Exact depths stay secret, though accounts portrayed it as a vast multi-level setup demanding heaps of industrial-grade concrete and robust supports. This transcended refurbishment. It constituted fresh development, generating previously non-existent areas, markedly enlarging the buried network. Rumors proliferated unchecked. Was this perhaps a fresh presidential operations hub? Or a vast hub for handling communication data? Maybe an upgraded bunker designed to accommodate additional staff over extended durations? Likely a combination of all those elements. An anonymous source from the administration mentioned privately that the project involved security enhancements. That served as the closest thing to verification anyone received back in 2007, 3 years prior to the start of the primary digging efforts. Suddenly, an unremarkable white structure materialized next to the West Wing. It simply appeared overnight. No one commented on it. No explanations were offered. Throughout the George W. Bush era, this enigmatic edifice wasn't recognized in any official capacity. Rumors circulated that it contained interim telecom gear or a server room, items that would eventually get transferred below ground as part of the 2010 build-out. Photos from that time captured the white structure clearly. Positioned at the extreme right side when facing the West Wing from Pennsylvania Avenue, it featured plain white siding, 0 windows, and no signage. It resembled a repainted cargo container abandoned in place indefinitely. Eventually, amid the West Wing renovation initiative, the white structure vanished, dismantled and carted away. Its contents might have been shifted to the freshly completed subterranean spaces. The building work pressed on into 2011 and through 2012. Barriers stayed in place, activities persisted, and officials stuck to their narrative of standard utility improvements. By the end of 2012, the barriers were removed. The digging had wrapped up. The north lawn returned to its previous state. Turf sprouted where heavy machinery had lingered for years. Above ground, everything appeared unaltered. The West Wing retained its familiar outline. The Oval Office stayed put. The structure's overall layout remained identical. Yet below the surface, things had shifted dramatically. Accounts from reporters who probed the initiative portrayed it as possibly establishing a setup akin to a deep underground command post. A DUC, essentially a more robust, isolated, secure site distinct from the existing PEOC. The DUCC would consist of reinforced, indestructible concrete, durable against nuclear fallout, buried sufficiently to endure nearly any assault. More of a genuine endurance bunker than a mere crisis operations station. Should such a site truly exist, it would mark a monumental advancement in White House defenses. The PEOC beneath the East Wing dated to a bygone period. This recent development aimed at contemporary dangers of the 21st century. The setup would boast cutting-edge features, fortified comms networks, satellite connections, robust servers for sustaining federal functions, climate regulation for prolonged stays, healthcare provisions, and all essentials to sustain presidential duties for days or even weeks in seclusion. Yet no official validation ever surfaced. Authorities never disclosed the precise nature of the subterranean addition under the north lawn. The stated purpose stayed fixed on routine modernizations. Then, in May 2018, an intriguing event unfolded. A subsidence crater formed on the White House's north lawn, precisely in the area of the prior construction from years back. The crater measured just a couple of feet wide, swiftly mended, but its spot was revealing. It appeared along the edge of the old dig site from 6 years prior. Could it tie back to the buried work? Quite possibly. The Capitol rests on unstable soil. Large-scale earth-moving can lead to subsidence. The crater could simply reflect the ground, stabilizing after bearing novel subsurface installations for so long. Alternatively, it might have hinted at other secrets. The War Zone, a prominent defense journalism outlet, covered the crater in depth. They highlighted how the position implied substantial hidden installations, ones potentially vaster than what the general public realized. The crater got patched promptly. The grass was reseeded. Still, the occurrence underscored that under the well-known White House expanse, a major addition had taken shape, something significant, something officials chose to hush up. The 2010-2012 undertaking reshaped the White House in manners the public may never grasp completely. The edifice that resulted after those 4 years seemed identical externally, but internally it had advanced considerably, an operations center surpassing even the innovations from the Truman overhaul, a complex geared toward perils that might have sounded fantastical in 1950. The White House had adapted once more, from grand home to fortified retreat to nearly a buried defense outpost, all the while projecting the image of a venerable landmark. The barriers had been cleared, the greenery had returned, the structure appeared untouched. But under the north lawn, something lurked, something formidable, something under wraps. The evolution that started with enslaved laborers setting stones in 1792 persisted. The residence crafted by Hoban had weathered blazes, rebuilds, and total eviscerations, and now it had been outfitted with features that had previously lingered solely in the confines of top-secret schematics stored in secure archives. The White House continued to embody national symbolism, yet it evolved into an impregnable stronghold, one that extended ever further beneath the surface, concealed, safeguarded, and primed for action. Chapter 8. Hidden Passages. The Subterranean System. Underground, the White House isn't isolated. A web of corridors sprawls below the well-known grounds, linking the presidential residence to various federal structures. Certain routes are publicly recognized, while others stay shrouded in secrecy. Each one fulfills a vital function. The best-known conduit stretches from the White House to the adjacent Treasury building. Dating back to World War II, this link dates to the early 1940s and formed a key element of early wartime precautions. Its creation addressed a clear objective. In the event of air raid alerts, the commander-in-chief required a shielded path to a sturdier refuge, avoiding any surface exposure. The Treasury's robust vaults, embedded in solid granite bedrock, offered far superior protection compared to the White House's rudimentary basement at the time. Engineers thus carved out a 150-ft corridor from under the presidential home to an exposed yard at the Treasury. This allowed the president to traverse unseen to a fortified haven in mere minutes. During the build, those Treasury vaults were repurposed as interim accommodations, 10 chambers sealed by a massive steel vault door, outfitted with comforts rivaling a luxury hotel suite. Should an assault occur prior to the full shelter's completion, this setup ensured the leader's protection. On the White House end, the entry point is said to lie close to the Oval Office, via a doorway next to a discreet lavatory. Past that portal, steps lead downward to the tunnel proper. Security features abound: surveillance systems, alert mechanisms, coded barriers, and round-the-clock patrols by Secret Service personnel. Far from a casual thoroughfare, it functions strictly as a crisis evacuation path and a reliable tie between two essential governmental hubs. Extending from the Treasury building is yet another route to the structure, now known as the Freedmen's Bank edifice on H Street. Erected in 1919, this predates the White House tie-in. Initially designed to ease the transport of goods and utilities, it later integrated into the larger underground grid. The H Street access point bears no signage. It opens from a side street via a reinforced barrier against vehicles and a fortified booth manned by Secret Service agents embedded in the facade. The slim, sealed corridor proceeds along the block via twin paths, terminating at the Treasury Annex. From that juncture, pathways proceed onward to the White House. Officials have employed this itinerary for low-profile arrivals and departures. Individuals seeking White House access, sans publicity, can enter at H Street and proceed subsurface to the executive dwelling. No lenses, no journalists, utter seclusion. Over the years, these passages have accommodated diverse uses. After her 1971 Rose Garden nuptials, Tricia Nixon and her spouse utilized the Treasury link to depart the White House. They slipped away via the buried route to sidestep the throngs and reporters amassed above ground. In the eras of Presidents Johnson and Carter, as recounted by longtime White House military aide Bill Gully, certain male employees purportedly leveraged the tunnel for covertly ushering female guests inside. It granted entry bypassing the primary portals, where sentries recorded all arrivals. Lyndon Johnson, it is said, navigated the tunnel to evade anti-Vietnam War demonstrators upon exiting the White House. Instead of confronting rallies at the perimeter, he could exit subsurface and surface at a remote spot. In 1987, under Reagan, construction commenced on Project ZP, a further tunnel, spanning 150 ft from adjacent to the Oval Office into the East Wing's lower level. Activated by pressing a section of wall to reveal a concealed panel, this Reagan-era conduit joins the president's working area to the crisis installations below the East Wing, a swift path to the PEOC amid emergencies. Accounts describe a flight of stairs from the covert entry descending to a storage space beside a dedicated lift. Past the verified routes, speculation abounds regarding extra corridors, ties to the Capitol, bonds to the vice president's home, paths to additional agency sites. The majority lacks substantiation. Whispers of a Capitol connection endure, though proof is absent. The span is considerable, more than a mile between the White House and Capitol Hill, rendering such a project a massive undertaking. Feasible, yet unproven. Links to proximate executive offices seem more credible. The Eisenhower Executive Office building abuts the White House directly. A subsurface bridge there would streamline logistics, permitting seamless indoor transit, though authorities offer no validation. Undeniably, service conduits permeate the vicinity. Aqueducts, power lines, heating pipes, data wires. The Capitol's buried framework is vast. Some of these underground utility corridors are spacious enough for individuals to navigate on foot. On January 6, 2021, during the assault on the Capitol, this subterranean infrastructure demonstrated its critical role. Lawmakers were swiftly relocated via these hidden pathways to protected areas. Vice President Mike Pence, for instance, was transported through below-ground channels to evade the intruders storming the structure. Such routes enabled efficient exits without risking exposure to the chaos above. The setup performed precisely as intended, safeguarding essential leaders, ensuring operational continuity, and facilitating prompt transfers among fortified sites. The White House's tunnel complex embodies successive layers of protection developed across generations. There's the World War II era linked to the Treasury, the utility passages from the Cold War period, the presidential egress path constructed during the Reagan administration, and the upgrades implemented after 9/11. With every addition, functionality expanded, offering more avenues to shield the Oval Office occupant, all while staying mostly out of public knowledge. Marine One, the president's helicopter, offers yet another means of departure. Stationed in readiness at the nearby Anacostia base, it can arrive at the White House's south lawn within moments during a crisis. The commander-in-chief simply embarks and the craft ascends, providing an aerial getaway instead of a subterranean one. However, air evacuation isn't foolproof. Adverse conditions can halt flights, or targeted strikes might block departure. That's where the tunnels step in as a backup, allowing relocation of the leader when airborne options fail. Together, they form a layered defense with diverse pathways, surface level, subsurface, aerial, or tunnel-based, tailored to the nature of the peril. Beyond high-stakes scenarios, the corridors handle everyday tasks too, shuttling materials, hauling gear, or letting personnel move between facilities amid inclement weather. Not all aspects of these routes involve secrecy or drama, yet their core mission endures, fortifying the chief executive, supplying bolt holes should the residents face assault, and guaranteeing that even if the surface structure falls, leadership persists from underground strongholds. The full scope of this network stays under wraps, the number of branches, their destinations, the features they include. Such information remains confidential for clear strategic reasons. Disclosing bolt holes undermines their effectiveness. Publicly acknowledged elements reveal just a fraction. The Treasury Tunnel, for example, is openly recognized due to its age and extensive records, rendering concealment unfeasible. Its H Street access point stands in full view, even if its function eludes most observers. Other segments, though, lurk undetected. Portals masked by anonymous doors, paths familiar solely to Secret Service agents and White House security forces. The iconic residence, erected by Hoban, rests atop an intricate web far beyond his original vision, channels extending outward, links to adjacent edifices, Expansions added over time as dangers shifted and protective needs intensified. From the surface, the White House appears self-contained, a solitary edifice ringed by barriers and barriers. Underground, however, it ties into a wider framework, integral to a system engineered to sustain governmental operations, regardless of turmoil overhead. These passages function as safeguards, akin to the PEOC, the reinforced framework, or every defensive feature integrated into the White House over 2 centuries. They persist because the executive role is far too vital to endanger, because preserving governance requires redundant strategies, because hazards advance and defenses must adapt accordingly. Thus, the pathways lie dormant under Washington's avenues, shadowy, fortified, prepared, bridging the White House to the expanse outside its perimeter. This concealed framework supports a prominent emblem. The shift from a simple Georgian residence to a nerve center incorporated such elements. They contribute to the structure's empowerment, to its evolution, in meeting contemporary demands without altering its storied facade. Surface heritage, subsurface strength. That's the enduring approach, and the tunnels capture it flawlessly. Chapter 9. The West Wing and East Wing. Broadening executive influence. When John Adams took up residence in the presidential home in 1800, the whole of the federal executive operated from a single structure. The leader, his aides, maybe 1 or 2 assistants, that constituted the team. They all accommodated easily within Hoban's blueprint. By 1900, such confines no longer sufficed. The office of the president had ballooned. The administration had swelled. The executive division now supported hundreds of workers requiring dedicated areas. Yet they were all squeezed into a house meant for far humbler duties. Change was inevitable. In 1902, Theodore Roosevelt addressed the issue by ordering a fresh annex on the mansion's western flank, an administrative hub where aides could operate apart from the family's private quarters. Roosevelt recognized the White House's dual, often clashing roles. It functioned as the president's residence and as the president's family struggled to maintain a normal life with government aides filling every corner of the home for official duties. To address this, he physically divided the spaces, constructing an extension dedicated to administrative tasks while reserving the primary dwelling for family living and formal events. The initial West Wing was unassuming, a lengthy, single-story edifice featuring colonial revival architecture that harmonized with the central mansion. It housed workspaces for the chief executive's aide, administrative assistants, and support personnel. Unpretentious and practical, without any opulence, yet it set a vital example. The executive mansion could grow outward. Additional buildings might be incorporated without altering the cherished central section. This inaugural extension evolved rapidly. Beginning as basic administrative quarters, it transformed into the hub of presidential authority. By 1909, under William Howard Taft, it underwent major enlargement. He introduced the inaugural Oval Office, situating it prominently on the south facade's midpoint. The rounded design was intentional, mirroring the Blue Room within the residence. The arched boundaries fostered a more balanced gathering area compared to a boxy chamber dominated by an end seat. Participants arrayed along the arc sat approximately the same distance from the leader. Taft's Oval Office gazed southward toward the future Rose Garden site. That spot proved temporary. A blaze in 1929, amid the Hoover era, severely harmed the building. The subsequent rebuild shifted the Oval Office to its current southeast position. Growth persisted. In 1942, Franklin Roosevelt appended a symmetrical wing on the east flank. Formally, this responded to wartime demands. The administration required expanded workspaces amid World War II. The fresh annex supplied them, yet this East Wing fulfilled a dual role. It masked an underlying feature, the inaugural PEOC, Roosevelt's emergency bunker. Construction proceeded above ground as laborers excavated below, forming the subterranean operations center. Observers witnessed only the office expansion. The hidden digging escaped notice. Design thus disguised sensitive building efforts, a tactic echoed in later years. These annexes reshaped the mansion's operations. The core home reverted to its role as mainly a residence and venue for rituals. Daily governance relocated to these adjoining facilities, particularly the West Wing, which epitomized leadership authority. That term shorthand denoted core presidential functions: the Oval Office, the Cabinet Room, the Roosevelt Room for team briefings, the Basement Situation Room for security deliberations, everything centralized in that linked edifice. The West offices remain compact, astonishingly so for their significance, spanning roughly 65,000 square feet, with narrow corridors and cubicles scarcely bigger than storage areas. Top aides squeeze into accommodations that no contemporary corporate headquarters would tolerate. Still, adjacency outweighs scale. Nearness to the chief executive equates to influence. Bodily proximity to key choices surpasses what virtual meetings or calls can achieve. The East Wing handles varied duties. It accommodates the First Lady's team in offices. The social coordinator operates from there. Public access and guided tours are overseen on that flank. Focused less on policymaking, it emphasizes the mansion as an enduring emblem and organization. Yet below that East Addition lurks the PEOC, lending the wing gravity surpassing its surface roles. During emergencies, it evolves into essential backbone, the portal to endurance. Across years, both wings have undergone frequent overhauls. The West Side has been reconstructed so often that scant traces linger from Theodore Roosevelt's blueprint. Successive leaders tweaked the layout modestly, reassigning rooms, modernizing equipment, tailoring it to their routines. The Situation Room debuted in 1961 via Kennedy, a fortified basement chamber enabling the president to track threats and liaise with armed forces leaders. Modest and unadorned, yet wired to global intel streams, it gained legendary status. Images of commanders consulting experts in turmoil, the extended meeting table, displays of charts and live streams, encrypted lines to worldwide bases, authority distilled into one lower-level space. The expansions also fortified defenses. Barriers could encircle the broadened layout. The areas linking the main building to the wings allowed for surveillance. These modifications simplified protection by outlining distinct borders. Viewed from the sky, today's White House resembles an H shape. The residence spans the middle bar. One wing protrudes westward, the other eastward. This arrangement arose through gradual, practical enlargements. None aligned with Hoban's vision. He envisioned one blocky edifice, but the office transcended those limits. Thus, the edifice evolved, broadened, and endured. These expansions emerged to address demands unforeseen back in 1792, illustrating how the White House transcended its origins as a simple residence. They embody the escalation of executive authority far beyond the vision of the nation's founders. Every extension signaled greater intricacies in leadership demands, larger teams, expanded roles, heightened protection needs. Nowadays, the West Wing houses hundreds of personnel, including policy experts, media handlers, defense specialists, and itinerary coordinators, all dedicated to bolstering the office of the president. They're all squeezed into that compact extension. The East Wing, though not as packed, holds equal weight. The First Lady has evolved into a prominent public persona, necessitating a robust support team. Hosting gatherings at the White House calls for meticulous organization and preparation. Visitor tours demand oversight. Such activities unfold within that portion of the estate. Collectively, these extensions reshape the White House from a mere home into a multifaceted hub, from a dwelling to a fortified base, from an elegant estate to a bustling headquarters. And lurking below, particularly under the East Wing, lie subterranean installations that add profound layers. The White House didn't merely spread outward, it delved deep. Passageways, bunkers, operational hubs, and comprehensive support systems remain concealed beneath the surface-level growth. The adjoining buildings facilitated this. They offered camouflage for digging operations. They established sensible spots for subsurface entrances. They justified building initiatives that hid sensitive endeavors. Theodore Roosevelt likely never foresaw such developments when he authorized the initial unassuming office addition. His goal was simply to separate work areas from living spaces. Yet, that choice ignited a progression that endured well over 100 years. The White House persisted in developing, adjusting, and broadening to accommodate emerging challenges, with the extensions standing as the clearest markers of that shift. On the surface, they appear as tasteful enlargements, sensible enhancements to a landmark edifice. Underground, they underpin far weightier elements, a web of protected installations, directive frameworks, the apparatus of contemporary executive might. The grand home constructed by enslaved laborers in the 1790s could never sustain the burdens of today's presidency. Hence, it enlarged, augmented, incorporated annexes and sublevels, along with networking setups and defensive frameworks. From Pennsylvania Avenue, the outcome appears refined, pristine structures linked by porticos, symmetrical, harmonious, steeped in history. But facades mislead. What resembles a stately home is in truth a directive fortress. What passes for administrative annexes disguises portals to buried complexes. What conveys stylistic unity veils a metamorphosis across 2 centuries. These edifices aren't mere constructions, they stand as testimony. Confirmation that the White House morphed into an entity vastly more potent than Hoban conceived, a structure tailored for a global power, engineered to assert and safeguard presidential command. And they continue to develop, adapt, and undergo alterations as successive leaders bring fresh needs and rising dangers demand novel safeguards. The metamorphosis endures, the extensions widen the layout, and underneath, the underpinnings extend further. Chapter 10. The shift in security from welcoming haven to impenetrable bastion. In 1865, an individual entered the White House with a firearm in hand. No one halted him, interrogated him, or inspected him. He merely proceeded via the main entrance, ascended the staircase, and stepped into the chief executive's workspace. His identity was John Wilkes Booth. His purpose was to present a message. Abraham Lincoln met him momentarily before dismissing him. Booth departed without incident. Just 9 days afterward, he would murder Lincoln at Ford's Theater. Yet the simplicity of his access that day reveals volumes about safeguards in the 1800s. There were none to speak of. The executive's abode was truly communal. During operational times, the public could stroll inside unhindered. They might meander through the ground level. They could queue up for a personal encounter with the president. No reservations required, no vetting processes, no scanning devices. This openness stemmed not from negligence, but from core beliefs. The leader answered to the populace. Thus, the people's dwelling ought to remain open to its owners. Ideals of democracy insisted on transparency. This accessibility lasted generations. Spanning the 1800s and bleeding into the 1900s, everyday citizens could casually enter the presidential home. They could explore the ceremonial chambers. They could greet the president during open gatherings. The surrounding grounds mirrored this openness. Folks sauntered over the grass. Youngsters frolicked close to the facade. Photographers positioned their equipment on the premises. The occupants dwelled amid what amounted to a shared green space accessible to all. Security measures did exist, but they were rudimentary. A handful of watchmen, occasional law enforcement in proximity, far from today's protocols. The chief executive was deemed secure enough, as harming him struck most as inconceivable. That notion would soon reveal its flaws. Repeated assassinations defined early threats to the presidency. Abraham Lincoln fell to an assassin's bullet in 1865. James Garfield was wounded by gunfire in 1881. William McKinley met his end in 1901. Over just 36 years, 3 commanders-in-chief lost their lives. Such openness invited peril. Following each tragedy, security saw only modest upgrades. Additional sentries, stricter visitor vetting, limits on close encounters, yet progress remained piecemeal. The executive residence stayed largely welcoming. Post-McKinley, the Secret Service assumed duties for safeguarding the president. Still, defenses lagged far behind today's rigor. Leaders could stroll the Capitol's avenues with scant accompaniment. Daytime entrances remained unlocked. The onset of World War I ushered in the initial major bolstering. Personnel multiplied, entry protocols tightened, conflict heightened fears of espionage from abroad. However, these adjustments proved fleeting, easing once peace returned. The era of the Great Depression and World War II shifted the paradigm. The People's House started sealing off general admission. Franklin Roosevelt contended with perils from radical insiders and overseas foes alike. Security ramped up. The estate grew more enclosed. True overhaul arrived in the post-war years. The Cold War reshaped priorities entirely. With the Soviet arsenal boasting atomic arms, the chief executive transcended mere politics. He commanded the power to unleash devastation. His safety turned into a cornerstone of the nation's fate. The Truman overhaul during the late 1940s blended fortification with architectural fixes, subterranean bunkers, sturdier builds. The structure hardened against dangers unimaginable to prior eras. Into the 1950s and 1960s, safeguards kept evolving. Barriers rose, entrances turned into inspection posts, sightseeing excursions narrowed, the property turned largely prohibited, save for select zones. John F. Kennedy's 1963 slaying hastened the momentum. A leader felled amid a Dallas procession meant the home base demanded ironclad defenses. Security took precedence above all. Throughout much of the 1900s, Pennsylvania Avenue before the facade allowed cars to pass right by the front barrier. That shifted in 1995, spurred by the Oklahoma City explosion. Authorities sealed the avenue for good to all motorized passage. It morphed into a walkway for foot traffic. This blockade redefined the boundary. Free of vehicles, monitoring eased. Obstacles could deploy effectively. Visibility sharpened. The edifice gained tactical advantages. The attacks of September 11, 2001 triggered yet another surge in fortifications. Bollards encircled the full site, hefty concrete slabs meant to thwart explosive-laden trucks. Curb barriers dotted nearby roads. The guarded zone stretched further afield. Guest entry faced stringent curbs. Excursions now demand thorough vetting, lengthy delays, and rigorous inspections. A spontaneous outing evolved into a bureaucratic ordeal needing foresight and approval. In 2014, the perimeter wall climbed from 6 feet to 13 feet, loftier, tougher to scale, more daunting. This alteration lent the structure a bastion-like aura over a homey one. Further reinforcements arrived in 2015, deployable bollards to halt autos, enhanced detection gear at portals, broader surveillance networks. All paths fell under vigilant oversight. The disparity with bygone times stands out sharply. Back in 1865, John Wilkes Booth simply entered with a firearm. Today, in 2020, entrants face airport-level scrutiny. Scanners, baggage x-rays, identity probes, rifle-bearing watchers at each ingress, the estate bars all but sanctioned visits. Onlookers glimpse the residence from beyond the railing, yet proximity eludes them. No lawn wandering. No intimate encounter like yesteryear's citizens enjoyed. Even the skies above lockdown. Overhead flights ban. Ground-to-air defenses lurk close by to uphold the no-fly edict. Intruders in the zone court destruction. Safeguards reach skyward too. Marksmen perch atop. Strike squads await cues. Watchful tech scans every angle. The network encircling the domicile mobilizes hundreds of agents yearly at a multi-million-dollar tab. The Secret Service oversees a buffer spanning blocks outward. Structures in that radius endure curbs. Select pursuits get banned. Spots for vehicles dwindle. Incoming rides face logging. The shift from public haven to impregnable keep unfolded step by step. Every menace birthed fresh protocols. Each lapse spurred stricter reins. The overall outcome: total seclusion. Once democracy's most approachable emblem, it now ranks among the planet's most shielded sites. This progression mirrors shifting threats persist, acts of terror, plots to assassinate, widespread gun violence, strikes from unmanned aircraft. Every emerging risk demands fresh safeguards. Yet this progression reveals another reality. The role of president has grown far too vital to endanger. The individual commanding atomic arsenals, guiding the world's dominant nation whose demise might shake economies and regimes across the planet, that figure must remain shielded, concealed, impervious to avoidable mishaps. Thus, protections multiply, obstacles rise steadily, security zones stretch outward. At a glance, the edifice appears unaltered. Iconic pillars, recognizable exterior, timeless design. Attempt to draw near, however, attempt to approach. Layers of hurdles await, sentries, inspection points, successive obstacles blocking entry. The edifice now functions as a bastion, disguised as an estate. Its fortifications blend seamlessly from a distance, rendering them unbreachable upon inspection. Project and inviting presence ensure true inaccessibility. This dynamic has amplified the inhabitants' authority. Beyond mere metal, stone, and subterranean bunkers, successive shields have shifted it from communal site to fortified outpost. The approachability that characterized its initial century has eroded. The welcoming portals for ordinary visitors have closed. What endures is fortification, divisions severing the executive from the populace. Certain observers view this shift as inevitable progress. Global perils necessitate vigilance. Contemporary hazards justify such steps. Critics perceive it as erosion. The abode of the citizens now eludes them. The emblem of self-governance encircles itself with ramparts. A core element has shifted irrevocably. Each viewpoint holds merit. The edifice required fortification to withstand current perils. Yet, in fortifying, it forfeited a vital trait, the openness that rendered it authentically representative. The metamorphosis persists, innovations advance, fresh dangers arise, countermeasures evolve, and the divide separating the executive from the masses ascend and solidify annually. An initially welcoming residence has morphed into an impregnable enclave. The shift from open to defended spanned 150 years, yet it culminates today. The change is absolute. The edifice asserts dominance not solely via its enduring design, but via seclusion, via obstructions, sentinels, and monitoring arrays proclaiming its inviolability. This executive office stands guarded. This authority remains secured. Chapter 11. The White House in the Present Day. Contemporary Operations Hub. The structure at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue retains its 1800-era appearance. Pale stone barriers, neoclassical supports, refined symmetry. James Hoban would identify it without hesitation. Externally, his blueprint persists intact, but such continuity deceives, a deliberate, preserved deception. Today's edifice diverges profoundly from Hoban's original creation. The outer shell persists from the 18th century. All else has transformed. Within those antique barriers rises a 20th century metal framework. Beneath the classic veneer pulses 21st century systems. Below the accustomed grounds sprawls a subsurface lattice that would stun the creators of the visible layer. The current executive residence encompasses 132 chambers, 5 levels including 2 below ground, 6 tiers of habitable areas, 35 washrooms, 28 hearths, 3 lifts, 8 sets of stairs. Yet these figures merely outline a dwelling. It represents far more. The basement's crisis chamber functions non-stop. Encrypted links span the Earth. Data streams from orbital assets and global outposts. The chief executive can oversee developments and direct responses entirely on site. The PEOC lurks prepared under the East Wing. Operated around the clock, indefinitely. Armed forces cycle in 12-hour rotations, guaranteeing swift activation during emergencies. The subsurface web surpasses disclosed details. Passages link to adjacent facilities. Concealed paths offer evacuation options. Its complete scope stays secret, though its scale impresses. On the surface, the family quarters span the second and third levels. The first family resides there. Secluded zones apart from the communal areas underneath. Sleeping areas, lounges, a galley, daily spaces mimicking routine amid the site's broader roles. Even so, the upper levels incorporate features absent in prior eras. Encrypted lines, fortified zones, integrated tech everywhere. These personal floors extend beyond mere habitation. They integrate into the expansive defense framework. The ground level accommodates formal gatherings and ceremonies. The East Room, Blue Room, Red Room, Green Room, State Dining Room. Such venues evoke the past. Guests encounter authentic era furnishings. Behind the elegant Georgian facade and timeless furnishings lies a web of advanced technology concealed within walls and underfoot. Sophisticated climate regulation ensures ideal environments for priceless relics from the past. Vigilant surveillance networks oversee each chamber around the clock. Robust connectivity links these formal areas to operational hubs scattered across the broader facility. The staterooms fulfill 2 roles: hosting diplomatic engagements and supporting discrete operations. On the ground level, you'll find practical areas like the map room, library, diplomatic reception room, and offices dedicated to diverse administrative tasks. This floor strikes a balance between grandeur for gatherings and utility for routine duties. Deeper down, in the basement tiers, essential systems reside: the situation room, comms hubs, security command posts, upkeep areas, and secure zones that link to even lower strata. The true depth of those subterranean layers remains under wraps. Officials confirm the PEOC's existence, and parts of the tunnel network are public knowledge, yet the complete underground footprint stays shrouded. It spans several levels below ground, likely exceeding what's officially disclosed. At the core of executive authority, the West Wing pulses as the central hub, with the Oval Office right in the middle. The president conducts business there every day while in the Capitol. Conferences, updates, and key choices unfold within that iconic circular space. Next door lies the cabinet room. Down in the basement is the situation room. The Roosevelt Room accommodates team briefings. Media handling operates from the structure's west side. All this activity funnels into this compact annex connected to the primary dwelling. The West Wing staffs hundreds: policy experts, comms teams, national security experts, speech crafters, planners, and political tacticians, all crammed into tight quarters to bolster the Oval Office. The East Wing oversees other duties: the First Lady's suite and aides, event planning, visitor logistics, and the main entry for guests. It focuses on the ritualistic and outward-facing elements of the presidency. Yet, underneath, the PEOC elevates this wing's strategic value far beyond its surface duties. During crises, it turns into a gateway for continuity, leading to the nerve center that sustains governance when the world above crumbles. The surrounding grounds form a tightly regulated zone, every square foot under watch, every individual accounted for. These 18 acres rank among the planet's most fortified estates. The South Lawn's Rose Garden stages select occasions, media sessions, official rituals, intimate lawn events. But such exposures unfold amid thick security: rooftop marksmen, on-site agents, cameras scanning all directions. The boundary wall rises 13 feet. Sensors track all perimeters, barriers block ramming threats, sentries circle non-stop. The whole site maintains eternal vigilance. Overhead skies are off-limits. Unauthorized flights invite interception. Below the soil lie hidden installations. The edifice can shift to fortified mode as required. Safeguards span every axis. Linkages tie the site to global military outposts: NORAD in Colorado, STRATCOM in Nebraska, sea-based carrier fleets, and worldwide diplomatic sites. From various spots inside, the president accesses any armed force or envoy without delay. The integrated tech would baffle folks from bygone times: fortified data lines, coded signals, biosecure entries, monitors for everything from atmospheric purity to fallout detection to rogue signals. The place can lock down tight. Ventilation purifiers engage, reinforced portals seal. It evolves from grand home to fortified refuge. The activation speed and resilience thresholds are confidential, though the setup is real. Over 230 years, this has emerged through steady adaptation. A classic manor exterior masks a cutting-edge control nexus. Period architecture veils today's force-multiplying tools. The shift from Hoban's vision to the present built up over time. Successive eras layered on protections, threats spurred upgrades, innovations unlocked fresh potentials. The end product defies comparison. It acts as home, workspace cluster, ritual venue, leadership post, refuge, info nexus, emblem, all at once, all in one entity that upholds a veneer of heritage. Visitors glimpse the anticipated: ivory pillars, iconic exterior, the structure from history books and snaps. Hidden from view, the metal framework, buried depths, gadgets, underpinnings, potentials. The White House wields influence via this contrast: vintage above, state-of-the-art below, conventional in look, cutting edge in purpose. It evokes the echoes of history even as it functions squarely in the now. This represents the pinnacle of its metamorphosis: upholding legacy amid total reinvention, retaining its outward form while undergoing profound shifts, safeguarding icons as it forges new strengths. The grand estate erected by forced labor in 1792 now serves as the nerve center for the globe's mightiest country. The edifice, torched by invading forces, has grown unassailable. The structure that once teetered on ruin from disrepair now ranks among the planet's most robust. Each ordeal infused it with resilience. Every peril spurred innovation. Successive eras poured into its evolution. Today, that legacy endures at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Ivory facades shimmering under daylight, pillars upholding a timeless entablature, design unaltered across ages. Yet beneath it all lies the true essence, veiled from plain sight, no longer just an estate, but a bastion. Not simply a home, but a hub of operations, not merely an emblem, but an arsenal, or maybe an embodiment of them all combined. The edifice harbors endless layers. It embodies the fruits of 230 years of U.S. dominance, forged through blazes and rebuilds, eviscerations and enlargements, reinforcements and safeguards, shaped by perils from abroad and within, empowered by innovations, compelled by imperatives. The White House ascended to its status as the nation's supreme residence by transcending the limits of a mere dwelling, by evolving into the uncharted, by reshaping itself without altering its visage, by masking prowess with heritage. That evolution reached fulfillment, yet it persists. Fresh dangers arise, advancements in tools progress, needs shift, and the edifice responds methodically, deliberately, always upholding its exterior while reshaping its core. The framework envisioned by Hoban survives only as a shell. In its stead rises an entity beyond his wildest dreams, an entity fortified to withstand any storm, an entity crafted for longevity, an entity engineered to uphold and shield the U.S. presidency across generations. The journey from colonial manor to contemporary stronghold spanned 230 years. It remains ongoing. It will endure indefinitely. The edifice persists in refining, adjusting, enhancing its potential, all without shifting its profile. This is how the White House claimed its place as America's premier power base, not through stasis, but via overhauling its very foundations while feigning immutability, crafting novelty from antiquity while upholding the facade of the original. The deception is flawless, the substance is awe-inspiring, and the edifice awaits whatever lies ahead. 2 centuries and 3 decades divide the placement of the initial foundation stone from the icon that occupies the site now. During that span, bonded laborers quarried Aquia Creek sandstone to raise the barriers. British troops razed those barriers with incendiary assaults. Hoban restored them and coated them in whitewash. Truman hollowed them out and embedded an iron framework within. Each era reworked the form while safeguarding its silhouette. The White House visible today merges the antique with the cutting edge, the venerable with the current, the abode with the citadel in seamless unity. It emerged from the toil of those forever bound in chains. It withstood flames intended to eradicate it. It emerged mightier after every trial. It adapted to hazards unforeseen in Hoban's initial sketches. The edifice gained its might not in spite of its shifts, but precisely through them. Every alteration bolstered its reach. Every restoration amplified its durability. Every augmentation widened its scope. What commenced as a straightforward presidential quarters grew into the control hub of a global titan. What started as an accessible civic landmark hardened into an invincible stronghold. What was once a basic domicile evolved into a historical anomaly. The evolution presses on. Emerging dangers will surface. Technological strides will unfold, and the edifice will recalibrate once more. Perpetually shifting, yet eternally seeming steadfast. Sustaining the mirage while redefining the truth. Such is the chronicle of the White House's rise to America's ultimate stronghold, via infernos and renewals, subterranean growths, strata of defenses, and 2 centuries of perpetual refinement concealed behind a meticulously tended exterior. The edifice braces for the unforeseen, for shifting adversities, for whatever exigencies the horizon holds. Ivory walls aglow, pillars resolute, might veiled under custom. The evolution fulfilled, yet perpetual. This is the White House. This is its path to becoming what it now is. This is America's supreme stronghold.